talking about using goals and values to find professional satisfaction. And I actually hesitated to accept this talk because this is a difficult topic and it's a complex topic, but it is close to my heart. And as I said earlier, I don't harbor any illusions of having every answer to this conundrum of professional satisfaction. But I hope that we can think together today and learn some stuff together. And with that, I will get started with a couple of learning objectives. So these are the learning objectives I was given to define. Well, by the end of today, we should be able to define key elements of professional satisfaction. We should be able to assess our values and use them to intentionally guide career choices from a holistic perspective and to gain some awareness of non-traditional career pathways. And I am happy to take Q&A during the talk, or if you want to save your questions to the end, feel free. It is completely up to you, but I'm going to dive in and get started with a true story from a friend of mine, a close friend who does not work at the University of Washington or the VA Puget Sound. So I feel like I can share this. Full disclosure, this isn't one of our colleagues, but I think that the story I'm going to share with you could have happened at many places. So my friend is a mid to late career internist who has a busy clinical practice. She has a busy life. She sees 24 patients a day on average. She's got 2 teenage kids. She is feeling tapped. She is feeling like she can't keep doing this anymore. She needs to reduce her hours or slow down or maybe even leave medicine altogether. So what she did was she, like a good internist does, we call it a consultant. She talked to her supervisor and they told her to apply for a hospital sponsored workshop series called Women's Career Satisfaction and Wellbeing. So it's a program, you have to apply for it. And then, they work with you to help you improve your career satisfaction. So it's run by a third party, not her hospital. And she did all this, she applied, and then she was accepted. And they told her, all right, yay, you're in. We're going to be starting in 3 weeks. But her institution actually requires 6 months notice for her to cancel clinic. So when she pointed this out to the program, their response was that, oh, we'll give you choices. We can't delay the start of the program, but you can choose whether you want to join this program between 7 to 8 a.m., 12 to 1, which is lunch, or 5 to 6 o'clock at night after you finish your patients. I think we can all see something of the problem here because, these hours are precious and she didn't have an option that would allow her to really focus. So because she didn't want to give up time with her family or stay late, she chose the noon hour. But she's seeing patients all morning and, she was consistently 40 minutes late to her 1 hour program. And it meant that she had to skip her lunch to attend her wellness and career satisfaction program. And as you might expect, my friend's professional satisfaction did not improve. In fact, it may have gotten worse from this career satisfaction project. And she still plans to cut back her hours or leave the practice. So I'm going to just stop for a second and think about what do we mean by professional satisfaction? I think, basically in the colloquial sense, it means getting what you want. But in a more formal definition, it means a collection of physiological, psychological, and environmental factors that allow people to feel content in their careers. And what that might look like in academic medicine is feeling fulfilled and accomplished in your clinical research and academic work, and able to balance the various demands of patient care, research, teaching, and other stuff while you are achieving your personal and professional goals. So professional satisfaction involves both what happens at work and also personal and professional goals, meaning stuff that happens outside of work as well. The professional and the non-professional need to be compatible. The traditional construct of professional satisfaction is to, you find your purpose, you get really good at it, and that should make you happy, right? Like this is sort of the linear, traditional, construct of how to get satisfied with your profession. But of course, it's a lot more complicated than that. I want to just say upfront, kind of like what my friend went through, that satisfaction is not a linear progression, and B, isn't going to be solved by a workshop. So there's so much more to it than just marching through a few steps. There's a lot of factors here, starting from the socio-cultural, like the things in our culture that we're supposed to want, some of these external factors like success, money, recognition, these things, there's a lot of pressure to want them, but it doesn't always correlate with really being satisfied. There's human brain factors. So our brain, just the way that the human brain is made isn't always structured to hang on to satisfaction. And so there's some kind of biological things that are going on that are barriers to long-term satisfaction. There's working conditions. So obviously we spend a lot of time at work, and some of the conditions that we work under, may not be structured to promote satisfaction. And then lastly, there's some particular things about academia that I'm going to talk about. So I want to just say up front, if you're working towards a more satisfying career, it's not something that's going to be tied up with a bow in an hour, and it's a lot more complicated than our traditional models. So the way that the human brain works, and I'll get into some of the details in a minute, is more like a colander for satisfaction than a bowl. It's easy to feel satisfied for a little while when you attain something, but hard to stay satisfied. So before we get into the details of it, I'm going to talk a bit about like why this phenomenon is occurring, if you've ever noticed it. So why are our accomplishments not satisfying? I think all of us objectively are very successful people. I mean, we have medical degrees. We are in a highly respected institution. Why is it that it's so hard to feel satisfied? And the theory that I think describes this best is called the hedonic treadmill theory. It's this idea that when we achieve something like a goal or a reward, we feel really happy about it. We derive a sense of pleasure, but then our brains adapt to it. And that feeling of pleasure is quickly replaced by an empty feeling. And we want to repeat the experience to satisfy the empty feeling. So all of this satisfaction that we get from achievement, wealth, notoriety, etc., is very short-lived. And again, this theory has been around for many years, and it's called the hedonic treadmill. So besides the fact that our brains aren't really well set up for lasting satisfaction necessarily, there are additional factors that are applicable to the field of medicine. There's, this construct of physician satisfaction. And so our understanding of this has really evolved from the mid-1800s, which is arguably like the dawn of the modern medical era. And at the beginning, physicians were individual people who were responsible for taking care of individual patients. So medical treatment was very limited. A lot of what you did as a physician at the beginning, of course, was bedside medicine, one-on-one with patients. You had total control over your duties and your schedule. You did a lot of house calls. You made up your schedule of your day and did what you wanted to do. And medicine was seen as a vocation or a calling with a intrinsically satisfying reward. Like medicine itself was the reward. You got to do this job. Meanwhile, things have changed a lot from the 1800s to today, obviously. Now we have an industrialized model that is focused on things like efficiency and throughput. We, the physicians, are seen as employees or producers. Like we produce visits, we generate RVUs, we do procedures. That is our function in this model. There is no longer individualized control over our duties and schedule. This is all determined for us by schedulers at some central place. And satisfaction is kind of up to us to figure out. And if you're not satisfied, that's a you problem. So what we have is a collision between a value structure that dates back, arguably hundreds of years, meeting a new industrialized healthcare system. And so there's a collision of values and expectations there. We also know that current events have had a big effect on satisfaction in medicine, especially in primary care, which is my background. And in the pandemic, burnout really reached an all-time high in primary care. In April of 2021, the burnout rate was 71% of primary care providers, which is double the previous year. And then if you look broadly, across states and looking at thousands of clinicians, almost half of practices had open primary care clinician positions they can fill, and 25% of clinicians were expecting to leave in 3 years. So there's a background of historical, and then there's also the current events overlaid on top of that. And even outside of primary care and even outside of internal medicine, healthcare workers surveyed in 2020, and this is a huge study looking at 20,000 plus clinicians, the intention to reduce hours was very high among physicians, almost a third, and APPs as well. And then the intention to leave was very high. So 1 out of 3 physicians and APPs were intending to reduce their hours, and 1 out of 5 intend to leave, their practice altogether. So, yikes. What is it about medicine that there are challenges to satisfaction? I'm going to go through a couple of theories. There are, believe it or not, there are historians and scholars that specifically study this question. I think it's really worth going into. The first obstacle that I'll describe to you is this thing called medical exceptionalism. That's this idea I was talking about dating back hundreds of years, this idea that medicine is intrinsically rewarding and it is an inherently self-sacrificing profession. We are different than other professions, basically. Exceptionalism persists because we get stuff from it. We get social privileges, we get high-paying jobs, medicine is prestigious. There are some reasons why this still exists, but the trouble begins when this expectation for self-negation masks harmful practices and policies from the medicine as a whole, or even from our institutions. So this idea that you'll do whatever it takes to take care of the patient meets industrial model where the goal is productivity, and you can see where there could be problems here. The second piece that I want to talk about is this idea of medicalization of dissatisfaction. This is the part where physicians who struggle with satisfaction are considered to be unwell or burned out or low in resilience. Again, this puts the onus on the individual, that pathologizes this idea of low resilience as an individual issue. Like if you had more resilience, you'd be better. And in extreme cases, and even daily cases, the idea that if you speak up about dissatisfaction, that you could face some kind of stigma or sanctions, like you're not that committed to your job or you're a complainer. This kind of medicalization of dissatisfaction promotes problems and can prevent people from seeking support when they need it. Lastly, this idea of individual responsibility. This is where physicians are personally obligated to maintain their own wellness to the exclusion of any other factors, meaning like it's all on the individual, and it's our personal problems to maintain. And obviously, like we are responsible for ourselves and our satisfaction and wellness to a point, but this solely tasks individuals with maintaining that rather than institutions. And it requires our institutions to do very little, actually, to help promote our satisfaction and well-being. Like my friend's workshop, it's like, yeah, we signed you up for a workshop. You figure out how to do it. You sort it out and get more satisfaction. So the solutions are lip service in some cases, rather than really fundamentally looking hard at why people aren't satisfied in their working conditions. Okay, so I hope I haven't thoroughly depressed you or anything. I do think it is possible and important that we talk about professional satisfaction and what we can do about it, because we live in the now. We can't wait for our healthcare system and our institutions to have a makeover. We have to figure this out regardless at this point, but I don't want to gloss over the role that some of these superstructures play in our satisfaction. But from here on, I'm going to talk a lot about what can we do individually despite all the obstacles that I mentioned. So I'll just pause to see if there's any questions or if people have thoughts. Okay, I'm gonna keep on trucking. So what does professional satisfaction mean within the context of what we just discussed and all these various barriers? One of my favorite authors on this topic is Arthur Brooks. So Arthur Brooks is a professor at Harvard. He writes for The Atlantic, and he has a great podcast called something like How to Build a Happy Life, I think is the name of his podcast. And so very much worth reading Arthur Brooks if you've never heard of him. He has a great quote that I'm going to share. He says, "What am I supposed to do to find a career that makes me happy is not the right first question. The right first question is, who am I? Only after we answer that can we understand our needs and desires. And only that understanding can allow us to get on with the serious business of what we are supposed to do with our life." So we'll talk a little bit and unpack some of that, some of the ideas that he's alluding to there. So, this traditional model where you find your purpose, you get good at whatever you're doing and be happy, isn't really the way that human beings work. The truth is that pursuing professional success, whether you measure it by money or power or awards or whatever external factors, usually leads people to be less happy, especially when chasing those things crowds out other important stuff like human relationships, or when it propagates institutional harm. And it lowers your satisfaction, paradoxically, by putting you on the hedonic treadmill of never feeling like you have enough, even though you're achieving and achieving and achieving. That said, what factors are associated with career satisfaction in medicine? Interestingly, this has been looked at in great depth. The Rand Corporation did a pretty in-depth analysis on behalf of the American Medical Association about 10 years ago. And what they did was they got a representative sample of practices in a geographically diverse group of states, and they looked at practices, different sizes, different kinds of specialties, different ownership models. They interviewed the physicians and leadership. They interviewed a selection of them, and then they sent out surveys to about 450 or so physicians and asking them about their satisfaction and their thoughts on those. The things that were associated with greater satisfaction in this analysis were perception of providing high quality care, so people who felt proud of their work, greater autonomy and work control, feeling like their values were aligned with those of the practice leadership, having a sense of collegiality, fairness, and respect amongst the colleagues, work content matched training. This is a huge one. And then finally, income stability. So not income itself, but having a predictable income. Stuff that was associated with worse satisfaction included EHR factors. This was the #1 predictor of lower satisfaction. So lousy EHRs with poor usability, lots of data entry, things that interfered with actually taking care of patients, inefficiencies, and then degradation of clinical documentation. These are some of the things that the folks they interviewed reported out as the worst of the EHRs. Lower satisfaction was also associated with excessive pressure on quantity and pace of work, and then having a lot of externally imposed rules and regs, especially documentation. So those are the things. What wasn't really associated with satisfaction at all was some of these external things that we might have predicted would be, like how much money you made, not associated with satisfaction. Whether you had a leadership role in the organization, didn't matter. And then other stuff like professional liability concerns or healthcare reform. I think that was more of an issue at the time this paper was written and this analysis was done. The ones that I really was surprised at is like how much money you make, no bearing, and then, you know, how like, quote, important you were in the structure of the organization wasn't really correlated at all. When you look at academic medicine in particular, so I thought that would be pertinent to our talk today since we're all in academic medicine, there isn't a lot out there on factors associated with it. But I did find one study that looked at graduates of a major Northeast medical institution that will remain nameless. And amongst about 3,000 or so graduates, you know, what the study did was it followed the graduates out after they finished and then followed them up and asked, you know, what was associated with their job satisfaction. And they felt that the contentment with their undergrad medical education was a big piece. This is among fairly recent graduates. Having a positive self-assessment, like again, feeling like you're doing a good job. Orientation toward lifetime learning, people who are engaged with other stuff outside of medicine, like, you know, outside of patient care specifically. So people who are teachers or researchers, and then folks who had a sense of professional accomplishment and discovery. So for people in academics, this is what seems to be linked to satisfaction. So, okay, so we started out and we talked about obstacles to satisfaction. We talked about some things that are correlated with satisfaction. How do we take this and move towards building a satisfying career? This is a really broad, rich topic. I'm going to do my best, but just know there's an enormous body of literature out there on this, and you should kind of investigate it yourself, but I'll try to summarize for you like a few key tenets. So outside of medicine, work is approached in a couple of different ways. I mean, we are here in this, let me get my pointer, this circle here, vocation, you know, that medicine is traditionally thought of as a thing where you have a calling and a career passion, but work itself can take many other forms. You know, you can look at work as a job where your main goals are get paid and you have a flexible schedule and you get out on time and go home to dinner, and that's enough. There's also folks who approach work as a career where your goal is advancement and upward mobility and you're trying to achieve a goal. So I think this slide is just to remind us that there are other ways to think about our work life besides this traditional sense of medicine as vocation, and that's all. So satisfaction killing pitfalls. Let's dive into a couple of those and think about your own career as we're doing this. External measures of success can really trip you up. The ones that our society emphasizes as what we should be striving for are things like money, achievement, and recognition. It's not that these are bad or something, like who doesn't like money? But, you know, it's if your satisfaction hinges on these things, it can be a real distractor from stuff that is also important and maybe even more important long-term. Our culture really does not tend to value the things that bring genuine happiness. Our culture emphasizes money, achievement, and recognition for good or for ill. So just be aware. Approximately 79% of Americans believe they would be happier if they had more money, which is, you know, we're one of the richest nations on earth. You know, like this is kind of comical that everybody's waiting to get more money to be happier. Some questions that you can think about asking yourself: if money is a struggle for you in terms of something that is associated with greater satisfaction in your life, think about these questions. What do you believe about the role money plays in well-being? Do you compare your wealth to others, like how much money you make, how big is your house, material possessions? Do you feel dissatisfied when it feels like others have more? In what ways does money cause you to feel guilt, shame, inadequacy, or self-importance? And how do you define having enough money? So if you feel that maybe this is a challenge for you and it's a distractor to your overall satisfaction, think about these questions and give it some reflection. Similarly for achievement, this one is really hard because every single one of us has achieved a lot and has, has taken up this banner as something that we want, or we wouldn't be here today, honestly. So think about it, though, in the context of the bigger picture. Do you neglect key relationships like your spouse, your kids, your friends in the pursuit of success? Have you sacrificed your health, like rest, diet, mental well-being, to achieve success? Do you feel disillusioned or resentful when you fall short of a goal? When is the last time you've felt a sense of joy or playfulness about your work, regardless of whatever you're doing, just because you love to do what you're doing? Do you compare your achievements to others? Do you begrudge their successes as less earned? And how have you defined enough achievement? Something, we're not going to solve in an hour, but things to think about maybe on your own. And then last one, this one is a big barrier, recognition and status. In what ways do you regularly seek out recognition from important people? Do you spend a lot of time monitoring your status on social media or PubMed if you're a researcher? Do you resent it when others get recognition? Do you try to manipulate conversations to impress others or invite praise? And how do you define enough recognition and status? These are questions to ponder and really give your reflection to, because again, money, status, and achievement are they're part of that hedonic treadmill, and if they are the only reason for your career decisions, you're not likely to achieve lasting satisfaction. Conversely, what brings about genuine satisfaction, and how do we get on a better road toward more satisfying careers? Obviously, but it still needs to be said out loud. Life is so much more than just work. I couldn't put it any better than Stephen Covey, who wrote the classic 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. But to have a balanced life, you need to have more than just work in your life. So on the physical side, this includes things like exercise, nutrition, stress management, socio-emotional, how connected are we to others? We need a sense of intrinsic security as well. That's where kind of the income predictability aspect came in, I think. Contribution. So how do we give service to others? What kind of legacy are we leaving? Spiritual, that's things like clarifying your values, studying and reflecting. And then finally, the mental side. So this, our jobs, I think, naturally give us many opportunities to plan, write, visualize, and learn. But also, important to keep in mind in other ways as well. So remembering, basically, life is more than just work. Make sure that we are attending to all these different domains of a satisfying life. And regardless of whether you have a leadership role, thinking about how will you be the leader of yourself, like whether or not you achieve these objective external measures of success, like recognition or money, what are you doing? Who are you doing it for? How do you comport yourself? How are you doing it? And why are you doing it? And then the big one, after you think about these questions for yourself, are what you're doing, how you're doing it, who you're doing it for, etc., aligning with your values as a person? And whether you are a kind of self-help book reader or not, there are a couple of exercises that might help you if you're looking to identify your values. You would want to do these on your own. I don't think we're going to be able to do them as a group, but worth doing, taking, an hour and thinking about stuff like what stories and experiences in your life form a pattern and give you a purpose. And thinking through some of those experiences and stories will help you to identify what inspires you. Another exercise you could try, think of a moment when you felt a deep and genuine satisfaction. It doesn't have to be at work, it could be anywhere. But explore what was going on in that moment and think about what values or aspects of that experience led you to feel that genuine sense of satisfaction. And if you are a list maker, or it's easier to get ideas by looking at a list, there are a bunch of types of lists of values you can use. I copied one here in case it's helpful. Brene Brown is a psychologist who has a great website, and she has a list of values you can look through, and it helps to pick a couple of these that really resonate with you, and can help you narrow down some of the many possible values you may have. So after you go through some of these exercises, the idea is really to clarify what it is, like, what is your why? Why are you doing the things that you're doing? And then think about your work life and try to pinpoint whether the things you're spending your time doing really are aligned with those values that you have. It is possible to have a satisfying career in medicine. I think until our healthcare system changes to make it easier, a lot of this burden ends up being on us to do the legwork, but it is possible. People ask me a lot about my job, and so I thought I would go through just to show you like all of the weird twists and turns of my personal career and the pitfalls that I fell into, and to reinforce with people that this is really a journey. Like, it's very rare for someone to march through a whole career from start to finish in a linear fashion. Certainly, my career was nothing like that. So I'll share with you kind of what I did in hopes that it will give you reassurance that if you're struggling or if you feel like you've made a wrong turn, it's okay, it's normal. So I started out as a resident. I was not selected to be a chief resident. I didn't win anything. I'm not a fancy person. The thing that I did that ended up mattering the most in my residency was doing a continuity clinic at a homeless shelter where I got really interested in viral hepatitis. And looking back, was I disappointed I wasn't a chief resident or, one stuff? Probably, if you'd asked me then. But what worked out really well was that my interest in hepatitis C kind of led me to my next job. And this came from a sincere interest in this population. And, it was just a population I loved working with. When I became a research fellow here in Seattle, I volunteered at a Hep C clinic for a couple of years and learned how to manage hepatitis C. I just volunteered because I liked the patient population. I wanted to learn some stuff. It wasn't because I was planning to make a career out of it or anything. But it so happened that my research interest and clinical interest turned out to be really well timed, because hepatitis C direct acting antivirals were just coming on the market at that time. I thought about doing a research career, thought about a career development award, ended up not doing that because I was recruited to be the director of data analytics for a program office within the VA that oversees hepatitis C and HIV. Here I was, fresh out of my research fellowship, in charge of like a data and analytics national group, completely randomly. As a staff physician, I started out on the totally wrong academic track. I was not where I needed to be. I needed to get onto the clinician scholars track. So I did teaching scholars and tried to reorient my career. But in the meantime, I had a couple of kids, and my husband's job sort of blew up and got really big. And I took a career plateau for like 5+ years, which was okay actually in the end. But at the time, if you had asked me, it would have been a source of concern and satisfaction problems. Most recently, I've developed an interest in organizational psychology and just like what makes organizations function and run well. I enrolled in a leadership certificate program and then got my current job as a deputy service line leader of primary care here at the VA. So all of which is to say, I'm not saying anybody needs to replicate what I did or anything, but just to show you, like, you go, you try something, it's not a good fit or it is a good fit, you realign yourself, you reorient. And it's okay, to not be smashingly successful at every single step of your career. It's really a journey, and that's completely fine. And as long as you are staying aligned to your values, it is possible to have a satisfying and completely nonlinear career. So if this gives anybody a little bit of hope for the future, then it's all worth it, A few tips to try to get on the right track. Like I showed you before, I mean, there's a lot of false starts in a career, but you learn things along the way. So show yourself a little compassion for having incremental progress. And you don't have to be successful by anybody else's measure except your own. And when other people are wildly successful, show them some compassion too, because it took a lot for them, I'm sure, to achieve whatever they did. And so show compassion for whatever they had to sacrifice to get to that point. And every step along the way, ask yourself, how does your job serve your values? Is what you're doing lining up with what you genuinely, truly believe to be important, and sort of the guiding star of why you're doing whatever it is you're doing? Okay, tip number 2, shift from counting to contribution. This punishing idea of perpetual scorekeeping is a road to nowhere. It is a road to dissatisfaction. Just worry about yourself. And remember, you are making contributions. Think about who are you making a difference for? For whom have you created opportunities? And whose life have you made a positive difference? If you feel like you're not as successful as somebody else, and you think, by what measure are we really evaluating that? As long as you are aligning with your values, that's successful enough, and the rest of it is noise. Next, shift from self-contempt to connection. It is so hard to show ourselves that compassion. It is totally okay if you're stuck or if you're not feeling very satisfied. Reach out and ask for help or ask for mentorship, and recognize that there's under no circumstances are you failing if you feel like you're not satisfied. It is simply a signal to reorient yourself and do some introspection and reflection and try to get on a better track. It is okay. Show appreciation to your family, your colleagues, and your friends, because they are an important part of everybody's life, and some of the most important parts, and they can easily get lost in all of this struggle for success. So appreciate them. And again, think about who needs you, who benefits from your work, who are you helping, and recognize how many contributions you're making. So I would say that to explore what meaningful work really looks like, I'll say that even with all the barriers to satisfaction, it is possible to find work that serves your values. And that's what, finding connection. You do have the capacity to make choices that have the effects, that do have effects on the outcomes in your career and your work. You do have autonomy. Think about where your job is leading you. And that's a, part of progress. Recognize that your job might end up looking different than you expect. I don't know that we can map out a career step by step and ever have it turn out how we expected. So just go with it. Your job might end up looking different than you expect, and it might end up looking different than than society tells us that we should want. But if it's aligned with your values, it is more likely to result in satisfaction. So last but not least, to find satisfaction, it helps to define yourself not by what you're doing, but why you're doing it. So reframe, instead of thinking about satisfaction as a place you're going to get to or as an outcome that you're going to achieve, like I'll be satisfied when I get promoted or when I win an award or things like that. Think of it more like a skill or a behavior. Like I'll be satisfied because I either, whatever it is for you, but get to work on an exciting project or get to use my talents for teaching others and things like that. Think of it as a skill or a behavior and not as a destination. And then last but not least, I will say it again, there are so many structural obstacles towards workplace satisfaction in medicine. We need to work towards restructuring our workplaces with realistic job expectations for physicians that make it more feasible to have satisfying and sustainable careers. So I in no way let our healthcare system or our institutions off the hook for their part of this. But again, we can't wait for all of that to change because our careers could be over by then. So we have to move forward with what we have, but simultaneously work towards a better workplace for physicians. So returning quickly to our learning objectives, we had set out to define key elements of professional satisfaction, assess our values and use them to guide career choices, and gain awareness of some non-traditional career pathways. So I think there is some work you can do on your own, especially around number 2. But I hope I've given you some tools that you can use to continue this journey on your own. I want to say thank you to all the people in the world, family, friends, colleagues, mentors, mentees, and supporters, all the people who remind us of what genuine satisfaction really means. And this is a picture of me on a mother-daughter backpacking trip with my hiking group. Not all the kids are in the picture, but it just reminds me, there is more to life out there than our jobs, and satisfaction is definitely more than just work.